The wind carried the sound of laughter through the cracked windows of the Rusty Lantern Bar, a place where cheap beer and gossip flowed faster than mercy. It was Halloween night, masks, smoke, and neon lights flickering like dying fireflies. The door opened, and silence followed. An old man stepped inside, coat torn, hands trembling, eyes searching for warmth that wasn't there. The music stopped for just a second, long enough for whispers to rise. Then someone laughed. By the time he reached the counter, he already knew what was coming. But what no one knew was who would walk through that same door next. Stay till the end, because this story proves brotherhood is louder than fear. His name was Frank Dalton, 72 years old, a veteran of roads no one remembered anymore. His beard was white, his jacket faded, his boots older than most of the men sneering at him. He didn't come for trouble, just a drink, maybe a little silence to drown the ghosts that Halloween tends to wake. Outside, the night roared with muffled laughter and the crackle of bonfires. Inside, the bartender eyed him with the same coldness as the others. "Bar's full, old man," someone muttered from the corner. "Go haunt somewhere else." He forced a weak smile, trying to hide the shaking in his hand. But when a group of locals decided that humiliation was entertainment, the night turned. One grabbed his glass, another shoved his shoulder, until the old man stumbled back, hitting the floor. The crowd laughed, the jukebox played again, and the door closed behind him as he was thrown out into the freezing street. That should have been the end, but fate had a strange way of keeping score. Frank stood outside, his breath fogging under the orange streetlight. The pavement was slick with rain, reflecting jack-o'-lantern faces that grinned at his pain. He leaned against his cane, head bowed, the laughter from inside echoing like a cruel song. He'd fought for this town once, wore its badge, built its roads, buried its dead. Now it had forgotten his name. The sound came first, distant, steady and low, a rumble that didn't belong to the wind. Engines, more than one. He turned his head, squinting through the mist. From beyond the hill, headlights appeared, slow, synchronized, like a procession of ghosts. The laughter in the bar faded as the engines grew closer. They came in a line, black leather glistening under the rain, chrome reflecting the jack-o'-lantern light. The Hell's Angels, and at their front, a rider with a scar that cut across his face like lightning. He didn't look at Frank, not yet. He just parked his bike and stared at the bar. Inside, the laughter stopped. They didn't storm in. They didn't yell. They didn't need to. When the angels moved, the air itself seemed to tighten. The leader dismounted, boots hitting the ground with the sound of intent. He walked past Frank without a word, but with a glance that said everything. Inside, the door swung open. The same men who had thrown Frank out went silent, eyes frozen on the patches stitched in red and white. No words, no threats, just presence, heavy, calm, unshakable. The bartender trembled. The laughter had vanished like smoke in the rain. One of the bikers picked up the glass that had been knocked to the floor earlier, filled it, and set it on the counter. "For the man you kicked out," he said, voice low. And they waited until Frank, hesitant but proud, stepped back into the bar he'd been thrown out of. Every step he took echoed louder than any engine outside. If you believe loyalty still has meaning, subscribe to Hell's Road, because stories like this are fought. They didn't storm in. They didn't yell. They didn't need to. When the angels moved, the air itself seemed to tighten. The leader dismounted, boots hitting the ground with the sound of intent. He walked past Frank without a word, but with a glance that said everything. Inside, the door swung open. The same men who had thrown Frank out went silent, eyes frozen on the patches stitched in red and white. No words, no threats, just presence, heavy, calm, unshakable. The bartender trembled. The laughter had vanished like smoke in the rain. One of the bikers picked up the glass that had been knocked to the floor earlier, filled it, and set it on the counter. "For the man you kicked out," he said, voice low. And they waited until Frank, hesitant but proud, stepped back into the bar he'd been thrown out of. Every step he took echoed louder than any engine outside. If you believe loyalty still has meaning, subscribe to Hell's Road, because stories like this are far from over. The angels stood around him, not as saviors, but as witnesses of something the world keeps forgetting: respect. They didn't buy him a drink out of pity. They honored a man who'd carried his battles in silence. Their vests, soaked from the rain, glowed faintly under the bar lights, each patch a story, each scar a code. They carried their colors like armor, symbols of loyalty stitched in leather. You can carry that same spirit. Our official Hell's Road gear is linked below for those who live by the code. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Inside, the bartender poured another glass, this time without being asked. When one of the locals, the loudest one, decided to make a joke about old ghosts and fake bikers, the silence broke. The leader turned his head slowly. His eyes, cold but calm, met the man's. He didn't need to speak. He just placed his hand on Frank's shoulder and said, "You've got nothing to prove, old man." Then to the room, "But some of you still do." The laughter never returned. The locals looked away, their faces drained of all the mockery they once had. And for the first time in years, Frank smiled. Not because he'd been defended, but because he'd been seen. The angels finished their drinks, left payment on the counter, and walked out into the rain. The engines roared to life, fading into the distance like thunder finding peace. When the noise was gone, only the flickering neon sign remained. Frank sat quietly, staring at the untouched beer in front of him. Outside, the town seemed smaller, quieter, as if even the wind had learned respect. The bartender approached, his voice softer now. "Didn't know they'd come for you." Frank shook his head. "They didn't. They came for what's right." And somewhere in the distance, a final echo of engines rolled across the hills, a reminder that brotherhood still had its guardians. Some roads lead to redemption, others to memory. If you want to keep the fire alive, the official Hell's Road store is linked below, where brotherhood lives beyond the story. That night, the rusty lantern never laughed the same again. The locals spoke softer. The bartender kept that empty glass on the shelf as a quiet apology. Frank still walked those streets, a little straighter, a little prouder, knowing that somewhere out there, on a road soaked in rain and redemption, there were men who understood what the world had forgotten. That loyalty isn't about power, it's about showing up when no one else will. And that sometimes silence speaks louder than vengeance. Engines fade, roads end, but respect, real respect, never dies. This was one of many forgotten legends of the road. Subscribe to Hell's Road and ride with us into the next story.